What's up, everybody? Here we are, the second Friday of May, the 8th day of May, the 8th day in a row that we've come live here with the I'm Curious to Know project. Today's guest is a special one, like they all have been, but this one's extra special. This is a reunion for my guests today and I. We worked together, we crossed paths for a time at Lululemon, and I have some interesting stories and thoughts to share about that. But before I go into that, Duke, how are you, mate?
I'm excellent, man. It's great to reconnect. Nice to see you.
Yeah, 100%. I want to start with the impact you had on me. I probably haven't told you this, and you probably don't know this, but you were probably the most impactful leader that I ever had the privilege of working with, and it probably just came through the way that you carried yourself. You were a very soulful guy. You're a very thoughtful, articulate person. You take care and time to get to know people, and that was really meaningful for me. And then there's plenty of other stories and thoughts that I can share, but that's my recollection of our time together, and it was an honor to work with you and for you, and now to be staying in touch and reconnecting today is equally as fantastic. So
I appreciate the kind words. I mean, it was a blast actually working with you. By the way, the one story I have to share is I had just moved into my apartment in Chinatown in Vancouver. And you and a couple others decided to have a going away party for your mate, Ben Jackson.
Yeah.
In one hour, I had 3 people in the building that wanted to kick me out.
So, welcome to the building.
Yeah. So I, as much as I actually have amazing fond memories of the work, I do remember, I'm like, I've lived here a week and I'm going to get kicked out because of Travis.
Yeah, that was a good party. That was Ben Jackson is a great dude, and we wanted to send him off in style. And what better location than the new boss's new apartment?
I actually remember you did this game because he was a Kiwi. He was going to the land of Oz, your homeland, and it was a quiz on language.
Yeah.
It was like 0 for 10. It was brilliant.
Yeah, I totally forgot about that party. That's great. Yeah, good memories there. I want to kind of take a step back and learn a little bit more about your journey and share a bit more of your journey. I've kind of quoted you as a bit of a marketing maven and an old school marketer. Tell me about your journey particularly into getting into sports marketing with Nike and kind of the grounding you got at that organization.
Yeah, I mean, I was really fortunate. I had in '89, I had just returned. I was playing hockey in Sweden, and I moved to California. My parents were living there. And when you live in Sweden, you can't wait to see the sun, because in the winter, there's literally no sun. And I was trying to get a job, and no joke, I was applying. I typed out 200 letters, sent out 200 letters, got 0 response. I then got a opportunity to apply for a job at Xerox. And I was like, oh, Christ, I'm going to be selling copiers. This is not going to be good. And then a good friend was like, hey, you got to come up to Nike. And I was like, oh, hell yeah. I love sports. It's Nike. And I was so fortunate. I landed arguably one of the greatest first roles ever. It's called an Econ. It's Nike spelled backwards. And it's, the brand forwards and backwards. And you're put in a territory and you're the eyes and ears of the brand, and they give you a couple simple tasks and they let you play. And I spent 16 years at Nike. And I think for me, I always say, I didn't go to grad school. I went to the school of Nike, and it's not perfect, mind you. I mean, I lived through the labor crisis and some other things, but beyond that, I think the way that place thought about things, it was intoxicating for me. And it was everything it was the antithesis of what I learned in school in many ways. And so I just felt blessed. I took on so many different roles while I was there. We moved around quite a bit. We were in LA, Portland, Montreal, Hawaii. And so anyways, yeah, that was my first, I somehow got really, really, really lucky.
Yeah.
And that was the first half of my working career.
Tell me about what that was like when you talk about that intoxicating nature, but then you also talk about the labor crisis, and even more recently with some of the things that have happened there. How did you reconcile that in your head? It's obviously a place that you love. It's a brand you stand behind. It's a brand you believe in. And there's this all of these other issues are happening. Like, how can you kind of go to work every day and feel good about that? How did you get through that?
Yeah, I will say the labor crisis was really, really challenging, because you want to believe that it's not true, truthfully. Like, and even Phil Knight, the founder, admitted his biggest mistake in that crisis was not being transparent right up front. Like, he was like, okay, hired the heavy PR thing, we'll circle the wagons. Meanwhile, there was a lot of people on the team, people I deeply admire, was like, no, actually, it's a subcontractor, but it's real. Like, this is something that is real. And I think for me, and the brand paid the price for that. I mean, dude, even now you talk about child labor, it's like, what brand comes to mind? So there's a stigma that you forever are, I think, you're connected to. And it was one of the reasons I actually left years later, was, I had been there for 16 years. And it was really, really good. And there was things, obviously, wasn't jonesing about. But I was like, I can envision the next 16 years. And I was deeply fascinated with corporate responsibility. And so I was like, all right, where could I go? And I got this job at 7th Generation, which was a leader in environmental household products. But what it really was a leader in corporate responsibility.
Yeah.
And so for me, it was really interesting. I went from Nike, where I learned a shitload around building a brand and all those things. I learned some other lessons that, from hardship. And I got to 7th Generation, and it was all about transparency. We would mess up, and it was like, we got to tell everybody. And, my first inclination is like, is that the right thing? And then sure enough, like, we would go out and tell the world, like, hey, we gave them honesty, not perfection. And people loved it. I got to the point where, man, we should mess up all the time, because we are honest. And I just was sharing this the other day with somebody. My first big meeting at 7th Generation was with Greenpeace. We had partnered. It was the first ever for-profit to partner with Greenpeace.
Yeah.
I remember sitting in the room like, I'm in here with Greenpeace. And for 16 years, this brand was trying to take the hide out of Nike. And here we are creating an activist program called Change It in DC with Bernie Sanders and 7th Gen. So it was, I think for me, deep down, I always was curious around well, what does it mean to be a soulful brand? And I learned about the role of soul at 7th Generation, and I learned a lot about how to build an emotionally charged brand at Nike.
Yeah. So when you were doing the introductions around the room with Greenpeace, you skipped over the period at Nike. You're just like, I worked at this company in Portland, Oregon, and then just move on to the next point.
Well, it's funny. In the interview process, there was this amazing guy. He was the director of corporate consciousness at 7th Generation. His name was Gregor Barnum. Sadly, he passed away a number of years ago. And he was a Yale theology major. And I go in my interview, and he's wearing his John Lennon screw glasses. He's got a ponytail. He doesn't say anything. I'm sitting in the room. He unscrews his thermos, pours some coffee in it, sits back, and he says hey, so you're from Nike? And I said, yeah. I'm yeah. And he's like, so you're like Satan? I was like, oh my God, I'm not going to get this job. And then within the conversation, we shifted to philosophy, and I told him how much I love Buckminster Fuller. And then it was oh, okay, we're good. And he was such an amazing mentor to me on how to look at business.
Yeah. How do you talked about your beginnings at Nike and your sports, and you're around sports people and athletes and driven people and type A personalities probably within that organization. And then you go to 7th Generation, and you've got the philosophers and the hippies, for the want of a better term. How does that work? Showing up every day, how did you kind of meld yourself into that culture?
Well, in some ways it was kind of a coming home, because I had gone to university at University of Vermont, where 7th Generation was based. And if you've gone to University of Vermont, it's known as Groovy UV, and it's, you got to love nature, which I fell in love with nature. In fact, when I was in school in the 80s, Bernie Sanders was the mayor of Burlington, Vermont. And it was a really radical time. I mean, there was the divestment from apartheid and everything. Like, it was a pretty interesting period. So I think for many ways, I always had it. I just was coming back to that piece. And candidly, I feel most at home in that environment, not necessarily a competitive sports environment, although I love sport, obviously. I mean, I still get pissed off when someone passes me on a bike, but yeah. But yeah.
I love that. And I think, putting the pieces together now, I can see the way that you approached both of those at Lululemon. You brought both of those pieces together. I think, there's not that so much of that competitive element at Lululemon, but there's still, you're moving, you're active, you're sweating, you're doing yoga, you're thinking about how yoga can transform your performance away from the mat, things like that. You came to Lululemon at a time when the brand really needed some help. People didn't trust the brand anymore. There'd been so many issues that had come up. What were you thinking when you're interviewing and you get offered that job and you're like, wow, this is going to be a heavy lift right here?
It's actually, when I remember this, I've shared this before with others. When the recruiter called, I was living in Ohio, my own company. She's like, hey, I've got this company I want you to talk to. I'm like, I'm good. She's like, I haven't even told you the company. I'm like, no, I'm good. And then she's like, no, come on, it's Lululemon. And in the fall of 2014, it was listed as a brand that wouldn't exist in 2015 with Sears. There was the recall product issue. There was the mercurial proxy battle with Chip Wilson, the original founder. And I was like, why would anyone go to that thing? Like, and I'm not really that keen on yoga. So like, who cares? And so I just remember when I walked in, I said, okay, I'll go up. I was like, all right, I'll go up to Vancouver. I love Vancouver, free trip, check it out. Was curious. And I'm always really attentive or attuned to the vibration of a culture, any building when you go in. I think a lot of times you can tell if the vitality of a place by just being attuned to the vibration of anytime you walk in. And I was like, this place is going to be a morgue. And I walked in and it was full of life. And I was like, what is going on here? And then, I remember calling my wife that night. I'm like, I don't know what the work needs to be, but I need to be here. And that was it. It was a feeling. And going back to the competition thing, it's what I learned at Nike. And I think it's one of the biggest misses for most companies is at Nike, we didn't really talk about competition. I know that sounds crazy, but our whole thing was recognize that we need to play a different game. So we weren't in the business of making sneakers and tees. We were in the business of bottling inspiration. And because of that, you played a completely different game. I mean, even now, go to Nike's Instagram, you see very little product. It's about inspiration. Yeah. And so when we were at Lulu, I think the opportunity was like immediately when I walked in the door, people were like, Athleta, whatever, like, look what competition's doing. I'm like, stop. Like, what do we need to be doing? And it was the recognition that we don't need to, the world doesn't need to do yoga, it needs to be yoga. And that was like, that's when the stars aligned for us and it changed. And then you don't compete. That's the thing.
Yeah, you make your own destiny.
Yeah.
I was privileged to have a front row seat to this all play out. And I know that there was some battles that you had to fight and some scraps you needed to win to get a lot of the initiatives that you put in place across the line. Tell me about some of those moments where you had to, draw a line in the sand and say, no, this is going to work for us. This direction is going to be impactful for this brand.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard because I remember like at one point we were doing this campaign called This Is Yoga and none of it had any yoga on the mat. And people are like, what the hell are you doing? And I remember the head of sales and the CFO were like, how much revenue is it going to drive or bring? And I'm like, I don't know. And they're like, we need an answer. I'm like, I don't know. But what I can share is I just deep down know it's going to work. And we were an exec offsite and I told the execs, if it doesn't work, I'll walk out. Like, that's how, like, I fervently believe in it. And I feel like anything else is settling, truthfully. Like, I actually think business is broken. And so I'm like, I've lived it in a number of places. I just asking that would be curious enough and see. And then sure enough, like, the work the team did was brilliant, and the thing just went on a tear. It's still on a tear.
Still on a tear. You referenced business is broken. Did you think that, are you saying that Lululemon was broken at the time, or are you just like a general statement of like how people can approach business or the corporate environment? Was it specific to Lululemon at the time you were saying that it was broken?
I think this is my point of view. I feel like there needs to be an unlearning project on around how we go about running business. I feel like there's this really mechanical rote way of how to build a company. And I feel like brand and culture for me are like yin and yang, like they go hand in hand. And like a simple thing, there's one principle I live by, which is it begins inside. And I learned that from Yvon Chouinard at Patagonia at lunch one time when I was at 7th Generation. He was like, we're sitting there having lunch, and he's like, God, you mess up the world. And you got it all wrong. And I'm like, me personally? He's like, no, you guys and CMOs, you're a bunch of idiots. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? And he's like, you spend all your time trying to like connect and inspire the outside world. The number one audience you need to figure out is internal. And so if you remember, even at Lululemon, I applaud like the leadership at the time, because I was like, I think we should go on a tour called Get Quiet, Live Loud. And I think we just got to give people a permission slip to play again. And that was like 17 cities around the world. But it was like a really, for me, it was a pivotal moment, because coming out of the hardship of the brand, we're like, we're going to get back and you need to be empowered to play. So I think that was the beginning, that and Camp Howdy, the brand camp trip.
Tell me more about that. Like, I'm really intrigued to think about how that's kind of played out. You have that lunch, you have that meeting, inspire inside first. Like, how does that show up in the rest of your life? How does that show up when you have conversations at brands you're working with or consulting to? It's not an easy message to understand. At first glance, it's kind of like, what does that mean? But so tell me more about that.
I think it goes back to another idea. You got to let people see and feel, and then trust that it's the right thing. And it doesn't always work. I just left Lime. Well, they eliminated the brand team at Lime, the micromobility company, 2 weeks ago. And truthfully, I never have any regrets, actually. Like, I went there with really intrigued, because I was like, I saw something bigger than a scooter. I saw the ability to focus on inclusivity and transit deserts and equity. And just, to me, it was like, and as being a bike commuter, I'm like, it just feels like we all should move in this different way.
Yeah.
But it doesn't always work, man. Like, to me, I would say Lime for me is unfinished business. I think there's a lot of accountability. I own the fact that it didn't work. I also think there was a strong Uber culture there. I think 30-40% of the company's Uber, and they're really wed to one way, And one of the things they teach at Nike is don't leave Nike with a playbook, leave with a philosophy. And that was so helpful, because like when I got to 7th Generation, I didn't have a big budget, and so you couldn't bring a playbook. It was like, but bring a philosophy. Yeah. And I just felt like my last chapter here at Lime was just an affirmation of like, okay, doesn't always go as planned. What's key is my chosen response. I'm not going to sit here and do poor me. I'm like, all right, I'm going to rally like hell and do things I love with the people I love again. Like, that's my thing. And I want to challenge the status quo around business leadership. I really do. I think it's time.
Yeah. I'm gonna put an asterisk on that, because I want to come back to that, because I know exactly the question I'm going to ask you. But I want to talk about Lime, because I noticed, obviously, when you went there, I was following along and have followed your journey, and I noticed that your DNA started to show up pretty much immediately. Some of the videos, some of the work that was being done by the brand team to talk about those things that you just mentioned, inclusivity and access to transit and the ability to get to where you need to be to live the life that you want to live. I noticed that, and it showed up. And I'm sad to see that, as you say, unfinished business. There's more to be said there.
Yeah. I mean, there's a live by the Bucky quote, like there's nothing in the caterpillar that suggests there'll be a butterfly. So when you go to Nike, it's not about sneakers and cheese, it's about inspiration. If you go to lululemon, it's not about doing yoga, it's the subby of being yoga. And my immediate reaction to Lime was, oh my God, like you can transform urban life here. Like there's the novelty of it, which everyone knows, which is generally a bunch of derelicts running around and scooters thrown everywhere. Got it and recognized that. And there's this whole other, there's amazing, Hannah Beachler was the set designer for Wakanda in the movie Black Panther. And she did a 500-page sketchbook on Wakanda. Like she just didn't build a futuristic city. Like she built it like she wanted, and transportation was a big thing.
Yeah.
And she has this great quote about how transportation and mobility has a domino effect, and at the end of those dominoes are human lives. And I wanted to show how mobility, micromobility in particular, has this amazing positive impact on human lives, whether it's growing community, clean air, or inclusivity. I was like, okay, this is it. I think the challenging thing is, and it's no different than anywhere else, is like, you know, the ops or sales team would be like, dude, I just been trying to grow trips. And I'm like, yeah, me too. I'm trying to do the same thing, but just in a different way. And I think there was a synapse error there where it just, and ultimately they made the decision that, you know, to eliminate the brand team, which that's their prerogative.
We have a couple of comments from the crowd here. We got our good friend, mutual friend here, Chet Long, Duke for president. I like that one. Maybe let's talk about that in a minute. And then we've got Christopher Henriksen here. Much love and respect from your streets poet fan. Duke, thank you for welcoming us into the Do Lectures USA community. I want to talk about Do Lectures, but I also want to circle back to the changing perspective of business leaders. And I was on LinkedIn a couple of weeks ago. Mark Cuban had put this op-ed piece out talking about kind of the future of civilization effectively. And your thoughtful comment and editorial commentary popped up as a comment on that. And so I dug in a little further, and I'm guessing that that's kind of what you're alluding to. There's this disconnect between business leaders and this capitalism and this corporate culture that you think can shift.
Yeah, actually, it was just to clarify, it was Mark Andreessen from Andreessen Horowitz who had written the piece, and I go, maybe it's my Vermont roots again, but you know, when you grow up in Vermont and you're living there, like Ben and Jerry's back in the day was just, they were radical, transforming business, but they cared deeply about the people. They cared deeply about the community. They stood for something meaningful. Yeah, the ice cream was epic and crazy, but it was like, there was just this radical nature to things. And, you know, I look at business as, I think it could be an amazing force of good, but I also think it needs to change. Like E.F. Schumacher, who I'm really going back to now, was this economist in the 60s and 70s, and there was Schumacher College in the UK. And he wrote a great book called Small is Beautiful. And he talked about Buddhist economics. Now, I don't think there would be a time to talk about Buddhist economics, but I think now more than ever, I would love to basically undefine what it means to grow a business and introduce a whole new philosophy. And I do think culture matters more than ever. I'm not a big Airbnb guy, but I think the way they, in a tough time of letting people go, I don't know if you read the note from the CEO, but I was like, that's how you do it. You know, shoot, they gave people really healthy severances. A year, I think, even on Cobra Healthcare. Yeah. And hey, I've lived the success of being an exec, and I've seen what happens. Like you execs we all get fat and happy, and then everyone else who's doing the big body of work is out there like fighting the good fight. And I just think, to me, there's a better way of doing business. So I just want to be the inspired protagonist, not the antagonist, for how to build a better brand and culture and community going forward.
Have you seen an example of that idea that you have showing up anywhere in business, or, you know, from afar, or something you've been involved in, or what's the closest that you've come to that ideal scenario and status that you've seen?
Yeah, well, there's three quick examples for me, and well, there's Patagonia down the street. You know, I'll tell you a quick story, and it's in Patagonia would never share this, but when I was at 7th Generation, we had a thing called Eco Partners, where all that head of marketing we meet. So Aveda, New Belgium Brewery, 7th Generation, Patagonia, and we would just share ideas. Well, the head of brand at the time was on mat leave, and she was just coming back. So the head of someone at Patagonia calls me and is like, "Hey, we don't want her to be without her daughter. So we're going to fly she and her daughter out. Can you make sure that you find childcare for her, and we'll cover it all?" And I was like, damn, like that place cares. Now they even take it another level where you actually they fly you and your baby with somebody. So right. You always have constant care. And I'm like, you know, and as a result, there's like effortless loyalty. People will run through a brick wall there. You know, there's reason people are there for 30 years. Like, okay, like this place cares about me, and it's a place of value. So Patagonia, my buddy David Hyatt, who created the Do Lectures, Hyatt Denim in Cardigan, Wales, you know, it's a great example of the world doesn't need another denim company, but he's trying to give 400 people in Cardigan, Wales their jobs back. And I think the way he treats that staff and his team, and you know, both he and his wife Claire, it's amazing. And then it's a little known company, but it's epic. I hope people could check it out. It's called Rhino Foods, and it's in Burlington, Vermont. And it's from Ted Castle, who's an old alum, was an amazing All-American hockey player in the 70s. And he supplies a supplier, so he supplies like cookie dough to Ben and Jerry's and everything. But what he's done, it's whether it's loans to his staff on how they do microloans, it's crazy to me. And, you know, Burlington is a big place for immigration. And I think his ability to bring in immigrants and give them an initial first step is like, that's the shit I get inspired by. I don't get inspired by going to a company meeting or town hall and people asking about their equity. You know, if you want to talk about equity, let's talk about gender equity, not your stock. Like that to me is like nauseating.
Yeah. I love your perspective on that. Little anecdote, Lauren and I, my wife, who you know well as well, we did a little tour of Patagonia years ago, and you know, she was looking at moving on from Lululemon at the time, and we did a tour, and they had, you know, Jerry's been here for 25 years, and Bob's been here for 30 years, and Judy over there is 35 years, and we were just like, at the time, it was like, oh, that's scary, like being in one place at one time. But you know, now, you know, it's clear why. And the other example of that, and I don't know if you've had much experience with these guys, but would be LL Bean here, just up the road from where we are, where same thing, you know, you've got your 20+ year award and you don't even get recognition until you get to that point, kind of thing.
Yeah, but I think there's something about, it's like building a brand. I don't care about awareness because I think awareness is full of gold. I think preference is interesting, but really what's beautiful brand is when you build effortless loyalty. So how do you build effortless loyalty? Not just with people, your guest or who you're trying to serve externally, but how do you build that internally? That's in that we don't know, no business school. Like culture to me, I think is this lost art. People think culture is like catchy phrases on walls or, you know, free beer at 5 on Thursdays or something. And, you know, that's so misguided. It's the set of actions you take, you know, that I think are a mirror into what you believe. And when that's done well, man, then you can have it.
What's your example of the best culture you've been a part of?
Oh, man, that's a hard one. I will say this, I feel blessed to, I think everywhere I've been, maybe independent of Lime, but it has offered something really powerful for me around culture. But I think for me, the place that is just most amazing is the Do Lectures, you know? And I go to the Do Lectures in the UK, I'm just like, I wish the world was like this, you know? People feel like there's a great sense of empathy. You can be vulnerable in the most amazing way. I think like guys, you know, have this immediate intuitive responsive, removing any armor or mask that they have, and it's and then people open up in the most incredible way, and it's a supportive community. And David, who runs it, even he asked me to run Do USA. I was like, do we need to do a contract? He's like, no, let's just put on a napkin or something. But, it's just, I think probably the Do lectures. But, but Nike and Seventh Dinner and Lululemon each offered, I think, a really interesting cultural experience as well for me. That was positive.
Tell me more about the Do lectures. For those who may or may not have seen them, heard of them, can you give us an explanation of what that concept is?
Yeah, so David and Claire Hyatt are this amazing couple. They created this company called Howie's, which is like the action sports, like Patagonia in the UK. They ultimately sold it to Timberland. And they had this idea to bring people together in Wales. And it's built on this idea called two films. And so David is a really eloquent writer. And he wrote this manifesto, and basically it says, on your deathbed, when you're looking back on your life, you see this film, which is your life. And he's like, but man, more often than not, there was a second film that you mothballed, whether it was because of the voice of cynicism or judgment or lack of courage you didn't consider. And so this whole premise around the Do lectures is to curate conversations around people who embody this second film. And it's a good example, by the way, of the world doesn't need another quote unquote festival or idea talking thing, but because it's unique, it doesn't compete. It stands for something. And so anyways, it's 150 people now flock to this remote town in Wales called Cardigan, and it's on his old farm. And the talks are in a chicken shed, and people camp out in tents and teepees and yurts, and you get like a Mad Hatter crowd. It's like all walks of life, and it's just really beautiful, really beautiful.
I remember that print. You had a print of that that piece on your wall in your office at Lululemon, and I remember, I left while you were still there. I left the building and quit, and I remember taking a photo of that print and posting it on Instagram at the time to say, this is me pursuing film number 2.
Yeah.
So I remember that vividly, actually.
I think that's what I loved about it as well, is I think a lot of times in life we can exist, but what does it mean to be truly alive? And I mean, in your case, my God, like you had this identity with Lulu, but really you had this identity as this rock star athlete. And then you had obviously a tragic bike accident, which I still like blows me away. And I just applaud how you were like, all right, like my chosen responses into like wallow, even in the hospital, man, you were the most positive dude. I was like, I think this guy got hit in the head.
Yeah.
But I think that's the beauty of that premise, which is to always be curious, like, am I existing right now, or am I really alive? That's why when I left Nike after 16 years, that one of the execs at Nike is like, dude, you just committed career suicide. And I'm like, I've never been more sure with thinking, I'm going to a place with 50 people, 50 million. I have no idea if it's going to survive, but I'm going to feel alive doing it. And like, I'm in.
Yeah.
So, anyways, I think that's the other thing with business is business usually plays it really safe.
Mm-hmm.
Like now everything's growth marketing and predictive outcomes. And I'm like, gone is the serendipity, the integrating the unexpected. Like, I don't want to measure everything.
Was that, I'm guessing that's probably part of the struggle you had at Lime, given the Uber influence, it was probably, how do we just, plot this on a graph? And if you're not meeting those numbers, then you're not doing your job.
Well, a lot of it was, and by the way, this isn't just exclusive to Lime right now. I have been in the CMO, what app chat group. I think like it's a self-help group. And I think the chief marketing officer needs to evolve. It's like, it's become long gone, right? Or is the soul and art of building a brand. And it's become like hey, we're going to do growth marketing. So I'm going to spend $5 and I know it's going to deliver X. Or I'm going to do like, just email campaigns around free unlocks or discounted rides. And I'm like, we did a lot of Lululemon around direct marketing and performance marketing, but we did it with a sense of intention and purpose around what we stood for. And then it had a different impact versus, I don't remember Lululemon, like, what are you doing to drive traffic? And I'm like, I don't wake up in the morning thinking what I need to do to drive traffic. I wake up thinking, how does the world get to see and feel and trust this brand in a different way? Like that's what would get us up.
Yeah. I love the way you approach things. And there's a couple of things that I remember specifically from the time there. One of the first introductions you made about yourself, you told everyone you're going to spend the first 6 months listening. And I was like, okay, I can vibe with this guy. Like, he's going to be open to ideas and he's going to, take it all in. And the other thing you said in that moment was quiet your cleverness. And that was your constant thing yourself of like having to quiet your own cleverness to see the other ideas through and open up to new opportunities. Tell me about kind of those two kind of ideas or ideals.
Well, they're deeply connected. I think I put myself from a place of empathy. If someone new comes in and right away starts changing shit, I'd be like, Christ, you didn't even take the time to learn about this place. And Lululemon has such a deep culture, and you recognize like the last thing they need is some cavalier dude coming in here like, yeep, like, hey, I'm going to change the world. And so I wanted to let people know that they're being heard. And I was like trying to really listen. It doesn't mean I always agree with everything, but I was like, I want to understand it.
Yeah.
It's a lot of what I learned through my wife in horsemanship. She's big into horse whisperer stuff. And it's like, how do you understand the essence of something? Like, a quick story. Years ago, my wife was like, I need you to go to this horse clinic and just pretend you're going to have a good time. And I was like, okay. It was in Springfield, Mass, actually. And we're in this big arena, and this horse whisperer guy's in the middle of the ring, and this woman brings her horse in up the trailer, and it's going batshit crazy. And she runs out of the ring, and the horse run around. And then 10 minutes later, the guy never touches the horse, but the horse is following him. It's called join up at his shoulder. And I looked at my wife. I'm like, I don't know what I just watched, but I got to learn more, because that's the most fascinating thing. One of the most fascinating things I've seen. And the whole premise is that horse whisperer would say, I need to take a gallon of you and put it in me, not a gallon of me and put it in you. So when I pause at Lululemon, I'm just trying to I got to understand this place. And that connects to quieting, like our cleverness. Like, I loathe when people aren't curious. I think that's the thing that for me is nails on chalkboard. And there's a great quote from Krishnamurti, who an Ojai here would say, beware the man who knows. And like, if you look in some of my moleskins, sometimes my only note is just beware the man who knows, because I'll be in meetings and people be like, no curiosity, but like, okay, this is my way to get grounded again. So anyways, and nature is the ultimate leader around how to quiet our cleverness, and she's flourished for 3.8 billion years. So I actually think we might want to listen to how nature does things.
Yeah. We could cover so much more, because I know that you're into, and I'm probably going to butcher this, but it's biomimicry. And tell me a little bit about that. Tell me the kind of the Coles notes of what you're working on there.
It's really simple. I think so often in life we learn about nature, but we don't learn from nature. But like I said earlier, for 3.8 billion years, like, nature's created the conditions conducive to life. So how can you take some of the life's principles within nature and bring them into your life or your business world? Like, what people don't know is that Lulu, for example, I brought in a lot of horsemanship and I brought in a lot of biomimicry without saying that explicitly. And, like, law of nature would be our life principle is nature doesn't try to maximize things, it tries to optimize things. But in business, we're trying to maximize everything. Mm-hmm. Think about Patagonia. If they wanted to be 5 billion, they could be 5 billion. Like, they're pretty intentional about their growth. And I just think I'm obsessed with that as a learning vehicle. I was at this Forbes event and I was asked what business book people would suggest I tell them to read. I was like, anything but a business book. And I was in Biomimicry. And you can check out Janine Benyos, the founder, on TED. She did a couple great global TED Talks.
Yeah, very cool. Sarah Webster, our dear mutual friend from Lululemon days, has a question here. She wants to know, given the current state of the world, what are some of the daily practices that you have right now that allow you to find or create joy and wonder?
Well, first of all, Sarah, you're one of my faves, so it's great to see you or hear you or read you. I mean, I will say this. I love the fact that yoga and meditation have come into my life. I find that just the beauty of breath is such an amazing practice. And I learned that through so many beautiful people at Lululemon. And now my wife is practicing, she's a yoga teacher and practicing Buddhist. I love to be in nature. So every morning I get up at the sunrise and I take the dogs up into the hills, and it's just my time. Love to read interesting things that are off the beaten path. That always helps. And I love my gravel bike. Like I'm interested. I would say 99% of my rides are solo.
Yeah.
And one, it's because I don't want to get past, but two, I just love to me, it's a moving meditation, and I can process headwinds, constraints, life. And then I'm like, okay. I mean, even my wife, like, she knows, she's like, just get on your bike.
Get out of here.
Yeah. And then I'll come back. I'm like, I'm good.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. That's beautiful. Thanks for the question, Sarah. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
I do like to finish the segment, and I hate cutting off conversations. I've said it every single day, but we're on a time constraint here. But I want to finish with 3 questions that I've asked every single day. The first one is, what's one thing that has changed for you during this isolation period that you're happy to keep once we move back to whatever the next phase of normal is?
I just love quiet time. I love solitude. I find it reminds me as a kid growing up as on a farm with no one else around. And I just think there's beauty in the boredom of life.
Yeah. Love it. What's one thing that you thought was important before all of this went down that you're happy to leave in the past?
Oh, man. It's a good question. I was going to say a job, but I think it's maybe ego. Truthfully, letting go of ego is probably, yeah, that's ego.
Yeah. Do you think that comes from that feeling of, the brand team's gone? Was that a hit to the ego? Is that what you're kind of referencing when that happened? Or is it just in general, letting go of whatever you kind of slipped into around ego?
Well, it's, you go to some place with the intention of making a difference. And when you don't, it's like anything. If you train for a race and you DNF'd, you're like, oh, that sucked. But I think for me, it's just letting go of that. Like and the reason that's the only thing that's inhibiting me from doing that is ego. So.
Yeah, understood. Final question. What's been your most memorable moment of joy or other, but most memorable during this period of isolation?
I commuted to Vancouver for 3+ years. I commuted to San Francisco for, almost a year and a half. I think being with my wife every day, and I mean, man, I just got lucky. I have the most, like you, I think we both found really amazing soulmates. And I think learning from her and just reconnecting in a different way has been, I think I took some things for granted, candidly. I'm like out there doing shit. And anyway, she's just, for me, she's like a source of nutrition for me. So that part's amazing.
I will say this as well. The way that you speak about your wife and the interaction and the love that you have is inspiring as well. So I just want you to know that I recognize that in you, and it makes me want to follow in your path around, how to treat and talk about and love your partner.
Right back at you, man. I think you're really beautiful the way you talk about Lauren. I mean that.
Thank you. This has been awesome, mate. I appreciate your time. We should do it more often because I always get so much inspiration and knowledge from you. And yeah, you're a great dude, and I really appreciate your guidance and time.
Thanks for having me, man. I love you. You're an epic, interesting human, and the world needs you. So thank you for this.
Yeah, likewise. Awesome, mate. We'll chat soon.
Cheers.